This is Spoil Me, covering The Wall of Storms, chapters 53 and 54, Discoveries, and The Aid of Adu. My bad. In these chapters, my two girls, they're a couple that I'm so excited, guys! Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Kyle for commissioning this episode. Kyle, buddy, I'm so happy. Okay, if you want to tell me, this isn't spoiler or anything, did I miss the setup for this, or did this happen sort of quickly? I'm not complaining. By the way, I am not mad that if it did happen quickly, that's fine. But I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing bits of subtext or hinting or whatever, because I felt like within the same chapter, I started to be like, oh, no way! Oh my God, she's into her! Oh, this is so exciting! Oh, I really hope that the other girl doesn't feel like, oh... And then it's all wrapped up by the end of that very same chapter. And I was like, oh, word? Oh! And I'm very happy. I'm like, this is what I want. Don't get me wrong. But I just want to make sure that I didn't just miss some of the groundwork being I've seen the groundwork of their friendship, but I don't feel like there has been a hint that they really had crushes on each other, or that either of them was gay or bi or whatever it is they are. But I'm fine with, because there's also the oddness of THERA being younger than ZOMI, and she's not so much younger that it's really at this point in their lives, I don't find it creepy. But it is a weird thing when they're, somebody from when you were young enough that the age difference was very significant, and eventually you grow up so that age gap doesn't really feel like anything. But for example, if I knew Owen back in the day, Owen's 6 years younger than me. I'm out here at 16 and he's 10. It's just a strange thought. And now we're together and 6 years difference and doesn't really matter. But it's just sort of an odd thing. Kyle says the two of them have always had an emotional reaction to each other. Sure, but that can be completely platonic. Ms. T says, I didn't see too much foreshadowing or hints either. Yeah, so, like I said, I am not mad at this because time is really passing very quickly in this book. So there's not a whole lot of leisurely character building moments spent when the two of them have gotten to this age. We're in the middle of a war right now. I understand not really wanting to bother taking your time with this. And I don't really feel like my feelings about this suffer at all from it being sped up a bit. But I just wanted to mention it in case it was I had missed something really obvious. So rumors spread around Dara that the Liuku had found a permanent passage through the Wall of Storms and were sending reinforcements of hundreds more garinafins and thousands more warriors. I don't buy it. Who's circulating these rumors? Where is this coming from? And what does this do? What this does to the people of Dara is it sends everybody into a fucking panic. People aren't wanting to pay their taxes because they're just kind of what's the point? What are you going to do about it? And honestly, they have a point. They whispered to each other, trying to ascertain what kind of deals they could strike with their soon-to-be foreign overlords to preserve advantages from themselves and their families. There is this one part. Some began to lecture their wives and daughters on their duties to the family, laying the groundwork for offering them to the barbarian chieftains when the right moment arrived to save their own skins. It's always women that have to remember their duties and lay themselves down, literally, for the good of all. But you don't see fucking men doing this shit, do you? Ugh! God, I'm so over it. I really am. To counter the gloomy and panicky mood, Prime Minister Kogoyelu came up with a plan for Consort Roxana and Prince Firo to go on a tour around Dara to assure the people and rally support for the Dandelion throne. They even cajoled King Cato out of retirement to play a minor role. So they begin to do these plays. They're called spectacles in this. While different actors, they perform these like tributes to moments in history. And it's really very smart. It's a reminder of how the emperor has managed to pull some crazy shit off in the past. Basically, what they're doing with this is being like, hey guys, remember when we were like under the thumb of a fascist like psychopath who was just murdering thousands of people? Well, King Kuni was able to overcome all of that. I don't know if you remember, but he's the emperor now. And he's super, super smart. Now, granted, things are bad because they have dragons, which none of us saw coming, let's be honest. But he is also extremely smart and super good at his job. I want to remind all of you how well things have gone in the past and the amazing stunts that he has pulled off. And just keep that in mind because I'm pretty certain we don't have anything to worry about. So just chill if you can, okay? And honestly, I was surprised at how well done this is, because when I think of like propaganda, all I tend to think of are artificial displays of strength via, military parades and that kind of thing. Or I think of history that has been like rewritten almost completely. Or I think of slander of the enemy that's really over the top kind of thing, using actual truth as propaganda. Of course that's a thing. I just don't really think of it that way. I always associate the word propaganda with the word lies. And I figure that it has to be, a whole other thing. So I'm just really impressed with this tactic. And I feel like you can already, as you're reading it, you can feel it like working on people. The climax of every show was the arrival of Prince Firo on the back of a mechanical Krubin constructed from papier-mâché and operated by a team of men crawling underneath. The music rose to a crescendo as the prince stepped onto the soil of Rui and slew the papier-mâché garinafins on the island with powerful strokes from his sword. And then Emperor Ragan, played by Kato Guru, who looked very much like the emperor, his younger brother, emerged from a trapdoor in the floor of the stage to thank his son and the people. And granted, I said that they are basing it in truth. The history is real. But this moment is obviously fabricated. I won't call it a lie. I will call it optimistic. How's that? So let's see. Oh, right. And I forgot that they use the mirror magic, which had been put to unfortunate use earlier in this book. They use that to depict a moon rising behind them and to cast a magnified image across the theater to a white screen beyond the audience. When the audience twisted their necks around to look behind them, they gasped as they were greeted by the sight of the 8 gods of Dara, smiling and nodding as the light flickered in the fragrant smoke that filled the auditorium. That's good shit. I like it. I mean, I can only imagine what this must look like, because they don't have electric light. So they're using like flickering flames. They have a mirror doing this, so they're not exactly moving, really. But it looks like it because Rosanna is doing her smoke magic. So this is really, honestly, smart and a really cool idea, and I want to see it. I really do. And it says, history, cleansed and given a fresh coat of paint, was often far more powerful than any myth. The plays assured the population that the Dandelion dynasty was firmly in charge, that the Marshal, though she had once rebelled, had had a change of heart, and with the gracious support of the Empress was now coming up with a brilliant and devious strategy that would destroy the Liuku and rescue the Emperor and Prince Timu. That the people of Dara were the inheritors of a long and illustrious tradition of greatness, that the Liuku, as savages who lacked strategic foresight or the benefits of civilization, were doomed to fail despite temporary gains. And Firo, after each of these performances, gives a speech. And I mean, Firo is the best person to do this, because this boy is obviously, while he's impulsive and he's not exactly somebody who thinks ahead, if he's given a speech about doing the things that you need to defend Dara, he is going to deliver that with like 1,000% the energy that needs to be there. Obey the law, focus on living lives as before, punish profiteers, ignore defeatist rumors, and most important of all, pay taxes and lend money to the imperial treasury to help the troops. Clerks then set up tables to collect the pledges of the audience, led by the VIPs for purchasing war bonds. So this, I'm going to take a sip of water here, but I'm really excited about this. Excuse me. This is fun because we're getting into war bond time. We're getting into experimentation with chemicals and like performance enhancing drugs. And granted, this shit is not new, right? Like it's always been tradition in various parts of the world. We're going to chew on coca leaves for, alertness. We're going to drink things loaded with caffeine. We're going to snort some weird fucking plant dried powder thing. We're going to drink a ton of fucking booze or something that's filled with hallucinogenic mushrooms. That shit for warriors has a tried and true sort of effectiveness in terms of just making dudes value their own lives less. Let's be honest. That's kind of what it comes down to. But this is a much more focused series of experiments with a particular goal in mind versus a general effect that's handed down through word of mouth from one warrior to another. These are tests and trials that are going to be documented, and side effects, they like begin to like figure them out and give them warnings. And some of the guys are just kind of like, that's fine. I'll take it anyway, whatever. So there's just a lot about what happens here that feels very like, the 40s wartime that we think of when we think about the Second World War. So Kogo, who by the way is the one who like came up with this this plan with the plays, good on you for I won't say fixing your mistake, but you're trying to do better. He calculates that after the Emperor's invasion in Rui and Dasu, the Liuku are probably going to need a long time to recover. And the Empress keeps sending messages to the Liuku, assuring them, we're right on the edge of coming close to our terms for surrender. Like, they're just putting them off. I have to assume The Ryugu know that's what it is because they're not stupid. As much as they're trying to portray them as foolish savages without a strategic bone in their body, these motherfuckers know what the fuck they're doing. Unfortunately for everybody in Dara, that is not true. Now, they might not have as sophisticated an array of weapons at their disposal. They may not have the kind of machinery, but that's not to say that they lack the basic understanding of, drawing time out, attacking before you're ready, getting you off your guard. I mean, that's really basic shit. So I'm a little concerned about this. I won't lie to you. Though the chill between Kogo and Gin Mazotti as a result of the Prime Minister's role in the Marshal's downfall had not dissolved, Gin did find the funds that Kogo's propaganda tour brought in helpful. I mean, that sucks. As much as, I appreciate that they're still continuing to work together the way they need to, I cannot hide my dismay at this wedge that has been pushed between the two of them. I hate it. I just want Kogo to be better. So they begin building all kinds of things. And that's what this money is going to. They are making armor and weapons out of really expensive iron and steel. They're building underwater Krubins that are faster and can stay undetected for longer. They can stay underwater. They are buying herbs that are sort of rare in order for Gia to start making these energy elixir drinks. And just overall, there is a lot of money being poured into very particular areas of research here, which I just find extremely interesting. Most of the money, however, went to the research laboratories in Ginpen. Secret, secure facilities were quickly constructed to house the carcasses of the dead garinafins that Thang Karukono's medical Krubins had ferried back. Mechanical Krubins. Why can't I read today? And Kogo Yellow dispatched spies to every corner of Dara to seek out men and women of talent who might have some surprising technique for overcoming garinafins. The Marshal didn't have much hope that such research would yield useful results. Putting her hopes on that outcome would be akin to relying on the occurrence of a miracle. But she was determined to give her troops the best chance possible, even if she was convinced that the task was ultimately hopeless. Honestly, I respect the hell out of that. It's one thing to really kind of feel like this isn't going to work and to feel like in your gut it's not. But if you choose not to invest in the potential that there is something there, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I really appreciate the fact that she's kind of I don't think this is going to be anything. But despite that, she's still I'll be damned if I don't try at least my best to give them the tools. I don't know anything about it. I think that's part of it, is that Gin is aware of her own limitations. And she's kind of this is not something that I am particularly excited about. I don't feel like I know what all you are even looking for. But I think she understands that at the very least, she can pass off what she doesn't know to somebody else to handle. I think that's something that Kunia is really good at too. I think that this is something more and more as I get older that I'm beginning to realize a lot of people are not good at. And I apply that to myself also, unfortunately, it's hard to say with me yet. But I think that figuring out people's strengths and delegating exactly to their strengths is the key to really good management. But the problem is a lot of managers aren't given enough resources to employ people with a real variety of skills that are easy to delegate to. You know, if somebody's really only good at one thing that needs doing once a week, what do you do? But so like, obviously dealing with nobles in wartime and whatnot, that is a very different situation to dealing with just employees on a day-to-day basis. But I think that the overall premise still kind of applies. So we get to find out about how this lab works. And it is, first of all, filled with ice, which begins to get so expensive as time goes on. Like initially, this is all happening when it's still cold outside. And so they have to travel to get the ice, but it doesn't take that long to do. Gradually, the team has to travel to glaciers to harvest it. And this is something that I find really interesting. And I know that this is not really a factor here, but if you guys know, let me know because I'm so curious about it. In the book Farmer Boy by Laura Ingalls Wilder, that book is not about her life. It's about her husband's life. And there's a part where she's like recounting how they used to harvest blocks of ice from the surface of the lake every winter when it was like, you know, the middle of winter, deep freeze. They would cut the ice into blocks using like straps to lever them up out of the water, drag them behind the horses to this like huge ice shed, massive barn. And they would pack the blocks of ice in there with hay and like sawdust between them to keep them cold. And I am dying to know exactly how long that lasts, because allegedly this would go into midsummer and there was still ice to be had from the center of this huge shed. The outsides melt, I would assume, but the inside is continues to stay frozen until practically winter comes back around again. And I just can't imagine simple hay and sawdust being that effective. But I don't know anything about it, you know, and this is all recounted from somebody's memories. So obviously it's not it's not a particular a point of view that I can rely on as fact. But I would love to know more about how that sort of thing worked. Getting access to ice, obviously, in the summer was something that only the rich could do. And I always assumed it was because it was carted in from far away. But then I sort of was like, even if it is carted from far away, they still need a way to keep it from melting. So how did they do that? And I would love a bit more detail on that here. You know, when they're bringing it back from somewhere else, how much time do they have to get it there before that shit is just gone? And how do they compensate for it? How do they keep it? I don't know. I'm just curious. So because of the costs going up, they really need to begin to sort of like speed up their research, because they're going to begin to decay or they're going to run out of money. One of those things is going to be happening soon, and they have to just get their shit figured out. So it says Kita redoubled his efforts. He expanded the cave and divided it into multiple dissection rooms so that pieces of the carcass could be studied in parallel. A system of carefully drilled holes and mirrors directed filtered sunlight to illuminate the interior of the cave, and he designed a concave frame with numerous refracting glass lenses to be placed over the dissection tables so that no shadows would block the view of the operating surgeon or dissector. I am dying to know if any of this is something that was real. Because it sounds real. That's what's so great about the way that he comes up with this stuff. It's like, oh yeah, I guess this sounds doable. It would take somebody with like, you know, just like a kind of genius and a kind of like a master craftsman that is rarely seen, but it's not impossible. To cut through this tough skin, muscle, and tendons of the giant beasts, he commissioned diamond-tipped scalpels to ensure the cuts would be smooth during the dissection process and avoid damaging the tissues needlessly with hacking and sawing. He set up several windmills on top of the cliffs from where a series of gears and belts transferred the power down into the lab, where they operated heavy machines for lifting and moving the carcass around. Since the entire space was maintained at near freezing temperature, everyone working inside had to dress as though it was deep winter. Except for scholars and workmen approved to work on the project, no one was allowed anywhere near the hidden laboratory. And I just this just sounds so dope to me. There's so much of these books that I just want to see on screen so bad. So then we get to THERA and how she has brought a couple of other women with her. One of them is named Cami, and one of them was named Mekode Zegate, maybe. Mekode Zegate. But Cami and Mekode are both really intelligent, and they are scholars. But they, because they are women, and because they're friends of THERA, who nobody really takes seriously, the reaction to all of them showing up is not enthusiastic. Most of these workers feel that THERA probably is not that intelligent. They've heard stories about her, but most of them think that probably they're a kind of propaganda, which, I mean, I'm not mad at them for being suspicious of that, even if I want to be defensive of, they just think that because she's a woman. And that certainly might be true. But, having doubts about a son of a royal or a daughter of a royal, maybe having their abilities exaggerated because of who they are and their position in society, that's a well-documented experience. I mean, that is totally understandable. So these women all have to they have to do that thing that all women know so well, which is prove that they deserve to be here by being twice as good as all of the dudes. It's the most tiresome thing, you guys. I cannot stress enough how boring it is as a woman to know that going into literally anything that also involves dudes, you are going to have an interim period of humoring their doubts about you and getting them to see what you are actually capable of. Oh, it's so boring. It's either they don't think you can do the job, and they are very unsubtle about that fact, and you have to prove that you can, or it's they want to fuck you, and whether you can do the job or not, they are totally willing to overlook as long as you will fuck them. And if you will not fuck them, then all of a sudden, whether you can do the job becomes extremely fucking critical information. It is just like clockwork, honestly. So they have to continue to prove themselves. And there is a dude in charge named Kita Thu. And Kita is, I will give him credit when he is proven to be very much mistaken about the dangerous gas that he thinks is no big deal. He is gracious enough to be like, well, I fucked up. You sure showed me that was a big mistake, and I feel like a real idiot. And I was a little bit worried that he would try and play it off as like, well, anybody could have made that mistake. I thought he might just be like, resentful and defensive and do that thing that people can do when they get embarrassed and they're proven wrong. But he doesn't do that. He's gracious enough to realize everybody saw that shit. I was really being arrogant and I really talked a big game. You know what? There is no saving myself from this. I just fucked up, and that's all there is to it. And I appreciate that. That's all we want sometimes, guys. We don't need, revenge. We just want you to fucking admit it. That's it. So he's over here arguing with her about whether or not these two even belong in the program. And I love that it's dropped in as a detail for us, the reader, even though THERA doesn't know, that both of them were beneficiaries of the program that he set up this is the program to aid with women and people who are poorer and from more rural areas to be educated and given opportunities, right? It's called the Golden Carp Program. But I think that's pretty dope, that we find out later that they are both like, they grew up on farms, they grew up working, and they have, because of that, a kind of experience that the people who are born to noble families and haven't gone through a lot of the trials they have, simply, they don't have that experience to draw from. So THERA decides that she is going to put herself really in the middle of the messiest work, because that will prove that she's not some mincing, prissy girl who doesn't want to get her hands dirty. And she also keeps her thoughts to herself most of the time. Now, this is one of those things that I could see easily being interpreted as she decides that she's not going to talk and draw attention to herself, or she's told to keep quiet, or it's made clear that her opinion is necessary. But no, she does active listening. She does the thing where you don't just not talk because you're in your own head thinking your own whole things and in your own whole world. She doesn't talk because there are people with a great deal of knowledge and experience around her, and she is listening and absorbing as much information as she can. Whether that information is accurate or not, she has the kind of mind that can figure that out in the end for herself. She doesn't need, what she's looking at, I think, is a combination of like actual information shared and the personality sharing it and the ways that the people's minds work that she's working with, because that's important to be able to like know what someone is like, because then you know how to go into a conversation about a certain subject with them and how they'll react, or what things are important to them versus somebody else. So yeah. And at one point ZOMI says, like, I know that you're interested in contributing to this, so why is it that you never say anything? And THERA says there's a time where to be a student, and there's a time to talk, and I'm not in the talking spot yet. I just like the fact that she can tell that there's a time for each of these things, and that ZOMI is kind of frustrated that she immediately understands that THERA is correct, but she's so annoyed that she doesn't see things this way, which, man, I really sympathize with. It's like there have been a couple different times in my life where I felt like an idiot, and once people pointed out how to do a thing to me or why a thing is working this way, once they say and point it, I'm like, oh, right. Oh, God, of course. Okay. But not having had it occur to me to think of it that way is extremely annoying, because I know that if I were standing here trying to figure this out alone, I wouldn't have been able to. I needed somebody to come in and hold my hand a little bit. And I hate that, we all want to feel like we have it all under control and that we can see things that, but that's just not the reality of the situation. And granted, if this, like, because, I'm making it sound like ZOMI's like, oh, I'm such an idiot. No. If there were another situation, I have no doubt THERA would be feeling this way about some other issue that she's not familiar with, ZOMI wasn't brought up surrounded by politics. It's natural that THERA is the one that is good at this part and understands that timing is important and when to shut up and when to talk. And ZOMI, who grew up as a peasant and she was not only a peasant, but an only child after her brothers went away when she was very young, she doesn't have any of that sort of thing to worry about. So, and ZOMI even, like, there's a moment where she makes a mask for THERA, which just, in the current climate with Corona is really funny to me, because she wants to give it to ZOMI to keep her from getting sick. She wants to give it to THERA. And THERA is like delighted with it. And then it's like, do you think that we could make these for everyone? And she doesn't say it in a like, hey, do you think we could make these for everyone? She doesn't say it like that, but ZOMI definitely feels a little bit like she heard it that way. Not like she thinks that THERA's mad at her, but she suddenly realizes what it would have looked like if THERA were the only one out there with this mask on. How, like, you know, how it just really is like, oh, we can't spare her. All of y'all, no, you're totally disposable. Which, I'm just saying, essential workers are being lauded as heroes when really they know and we know it is because nobody gives a shit. It's not that they're heroes. They are poor. They have to work here. You guys refuse to give up your privilege to do whatever the fuck you feel like doing, and you demand that these places be open. You don't care. Can we just admit it now? Is that, you know? And so ZOMI is wise enough, as have, you know, coming from a family that was seen as very disposable, she realizes like, oh God, that was really like embarrassing and I didn't even think about it. So THERA is holding her hand when she asks her this. And it says, ZOMI concentrated on the sensation of the princess's fingers against her palm. They were rough from wielding heavy tools against tough garinafin skin, but ZOMI thought they were lovely and smooth beyond measure. She nodded. For hours afterward, ZOMI caressed her own palm, trying to recreate the warmth of THERA's hand. Guys, I can't tell you how delighted I was. I got so excited about this. Meanwhile, ZOMI has a whole different experience versus THERA in terms of the way that she is respected right away. Which, honestly, I should have seen coming, but I had it backwards in my head. I had it that THERA, being the princess, would be afforded more respect because everybody knows that her dad is going to fuck them up if they don't. And, like, you know, Kuni wouldn't, not really. He's got better shit to worry about right now. But I thought that would be more of a threat to them. And that ZOMI, having come from, like, a poor family and having sort of, like, betrayed Gin at one point, that they would like be looking down on her. But what it is that they think with THERA that it's nepotism, and with ZOMI they believe like she went through all the schooling, like she knows what she's fucking doing. She soon established herself as one of the leading experts on the garinafins, as she had read Luan Zija's account many times. Luan Ziaji's? And her own detailed notes from observing the creatures in action in Rui proved invaluable in connecting the anatomical features of the garinafins with their behavior. Working side by side at a joint task brought ZOMI and THERA even closer, as they navigated and climbed around a mountainous maze made of garinafin guts. They kept up a constant stream of chatter and laughter as though they were strolling through a lovely garden and commenting upon the exotic flowers. I really, really enjoy this a lot. It's so fun. So the main thing that they are trying to figure out is how they breathe fire. How they stay aloft is surprising to me, not a huge priority for them. And I guess that they, you know, they believed at first that it was like, oh, they do the thing that the Mingan Falcons do, which is they swoop over and they take on air from the volcanoes, right? Those like areas. And there's just this assumption that the dragons do this too, although there's really no evidence to support that. The only evidence they have is precedent. This is something that we know about that another animal does, and therefore that must be what's going on here. Which, honestly, so much of what we do is like functions on that sort of assumption. We predicate our idea on something that we already know is real. And the idea of just starting from scratch with something we've never even heard of or considered, I mean, how do you do that? So I really enjoy this moment of of the investigation of the gas sack So it says, even with the hollow and light bones and gigantic wings, it appears these creatures still need the assistance of such sacs for flight. But that means they're as dependent on the lift gas as our airships, said an exciting Cammy, who made it a point to speak up and not let herself be intimidated by so many well-known scholars around her, a habit that irritated many of the older established scholars. Oh, I'm sure it does. If we can cut off their supply, the garinafins will eventually become earthbound. But Zomi's like, I don't think so. We never saw them sending them over to, like, resupply on lift gas. There was no mention of any of that in the notes. And if that's how they fly, which is a pretty significant fucking portion of their, threat as a weapon, that would be in the notes. They suggest, like, well, maybe it wasn't mentioned because it was taken as a given. And she's just like, I don't see it. So they go on kind of like discussing what the potentials are. And THERA is like asking to examine the sacks of gas. And he ties one to a string, and like helium, it lifts off the ground on its own. It's not, this is not just like, the superheated, like, I keep thinking of the air inside of like a hot air balloon or something. He took a sharpened hollow reed and stuck it into the sack, and gas hisses out of the tube. And Princess Thera's like, hey, buddy, that's some gas that we don't know about. Maybe don't just puncture it and let it fill the room. I'm just saying. And THERA was like, okay, you know what? I know what I'm fucking doing, little girl. You don't need to talk to me like I don't know. I've been doing this shit a long fucking time. Longer than you've even been alive. So just, you know what? I'm irritated. Somebody get me a smoke. And this kid goes outside to go get a lighter for his smoke. Because they're using mirrors and sunlight to fill the room with light. They don't have any torches in here. There's nothing like that. And the fucking balloon explodes and it's a fireball. And his fucking hair and clothes all get set on fire. Which, stop, drop, and roll is all well and good. I really do not know, were I in his situation, that is what I would think to do. That's what I want to think I would think to do, And Mikode asks, as soon as she sees what's happening, THERA for her robe. And THERA pulls off, basically, her robe. Like, I thought of that as, like, her coat. But we find out later, she's standing there in her underwear after this. So she's like, that's her whole outfit. And they use that to muffle the flames and extinguish them. And THERA, like I said, sits up and is like, well, shit, I was so wrong. I am really sorry about that. And ZOMI tells everybody, we need to get the air circulating. Do not cut open any more of those sacks. Do not bring any fucking fire in these rooms. Like, she's going and managing that whole aspect of it. And meanwhile, poor THERA is like standing there in her underwear. And the elder is like being rolled like a log in order to put the rest of the fire out. And everybody's just staring like, oh shit. And he says, just goes to show that living for many years does not necessarily gain you any wisdom, which I really liked that he phrased it that way. It wasn't just like, well, I guess I was wrong on that one. He's much more like, I really was an idiot just all around. Like, that was no good. And I was like, yeah, you know what? You're learning some humility, and I appreciate that. And he asks Mikode how she knew what to do. And she's like, well, I grew up in a kitchen. That shit happened all the time. Like grease fires and getting your skirt caught on fire by the, when you're going by a giant fucking roaring fireplace roasting shit. Yeah, I would imagine that would be a danger. So she's just like, yeah, we know how to deal with it. And Cammy also had that same experience. They're both, grew up poor. So they both had to be in the kitchens. They didn't have servants doing shit for them. And then THERA says, because he's like, you stayed calm too, though. So how? And she says, when my father was a young man, his friend, Farsight Secretary Coda, was caught in a firebomb attack. My father had to figure out how to put out such a fire by separating the flames from air to save his friend. The story made quite an impression on me, and so I was able to put it into practice without much thought. And after that, everybody's basically like, well, damn, all right, I guess you guys deserve to be on the team. It only takes a couple months. So the bond between ZOMI and THERA grows more and more strong. They're always together, eating together, talking together all the time. And it says the investigation into the garinafins had slowed down as the scholars were mired in endless debate over the nature of the air sacs and how to reconcile them to the observed behavior of the beasts. There were too many theories, and everyone was frustrated as imperial messengers from Pan demanded updates every other day, reminding everybody of the looming war with the Liuku. So then we have the conversation between THERA and ZOMI. Kyle says the dragons probably use hydrogen as opposed to the lift gas, which is probably helium. Hydrogen being slightly less floaty, but way more flammable. That makes sense. Yeah. So ZOMI is, they're looking out the window and there is a rainbow. And it's an interesting moment because THERA says, isn't this lovely? And ZOMI smiles and points at the rainbow. And THERA's like, what? What is it? And ZOMI just smiles and points again. And THERA says, is this a riddle? And ZOMI just does it again. And finally THERA says, I don't get it. You got to just tell me what you're trying to say. And ZOMI says, my mother once told me a story about the gods and the calendrical dozen. And in that story, Lord Lutho chose to answer every question posed to him this way. The gods are full of mysteries. What a weird thing to do. You know what this really reminded me of? God bless him. So Owen he's like just young enough that his experience growing up was very different than mine. In that he had a lot of, access to YouTube when he was in high school, which was not even a thing when I was in high school. And thus he is somebody for whom referencing things and some of the references being very obscure just is second nature. That's part of how he carries on a conversation, is by referencing other things that we've also watched, or maybe not. Maybe that he only has watched, but he somehow thinks I have, or that I'll get it. And these moments of him saying a thing that makes no sense to me out of context of the show or out of context of anything sometimes, because I don't even know where it's from. And then he'll give me this expectant look, like he really wants me to get it. And I don't even know what he's referencing half the time. This is what that reminded me of a lot. Just her looking and ZOMI's just pointing again and her just being like, what? Just tell me, God, just tell me what you're trying to say. I was grateful that THERA doesn't react quite as much frustration as I do by now. So this moment, they really connect over the fact that they both are not going to for example, THERA is saying that she would have liked to meet ZOMI's mother and she's gone, and this is just such a, that's a real thing when you are into someone. You want to know everything about them and meet all of the people that mattered in their lives, and vice versa. If you are into someone, you want the person you're into to meet your people as well. And that's a really hard thing. As our wedding looms closer, I am more and more aware of how Owen never met my dad, and my dad died not knowing Owen. And what a huge rift that is, and what a shame. And yeah, I really felt this moment in my guts. So they are looking out at everything and talking about how far they've come and all of the things that they have gone through. THERA, mentions the harness for Zomi's leg and how amazing this piece of machinery is. And Zomi confesses that she kind of feels like she's letting Luanzia down by not having completed this task more quickly. She feels like he would have had it figured out already. And we're still we're not there yet. And this is so annoying. And THERA's like, I mean, he was very smart, but I don't see him just having figured this out already. He believed that you could find things out. The universe is knowable, was his whole thing. But he wasn't supernatural. And if we keep at it in the same way that he would have kept at it, I think we'll get where we need to go. It's just taking a little while. And Zomi smiles at one point, and THERA says, "You're beautiful when you smile." And I love this moment. Zomi bristled. She had always been sensitive about maintaining a serious demeanor to prove she belonged among the ranks of the learned. "Are you telling me to smile more?" "Not at all," said THERA. "It made me happy to see you happy, and I hope we'll have more moments of genuine joy together." And this is when THERA's like, I can't believe it. First of all, you're blushing. Second of all, you used to intimidate me, and I cannot believe that this is where we are now. And then she says, "I'm really glad we're working on this together." And Zomi says, "Me too. And I'm really grateful that you saw I was being a coward when I wanted to leave court." And THERA says, "I showed you what you knew to be true already. A friend is a mirror who reflects the truth back to us." And Zomi turns to her and says, "What if I want to be more than friends?" And THERA, this phrase is so funny. "I thought I was playing the zither to the ruminating cow, but it turns out that I was the cow who was too afraid to dance." I swear to God, that is so, I know entirely what she's saying here, but out of context, you're just like, what are you talking about? And Zomi says, "Is that a yes?" And then THERA grabs her and they kiss each other and everything is so happy and good. Yay. So Atharo comes at them and is like, "We really need to figure out a way to measure this gas. We need to figure out some ways to figure out what the fuck is going on here." And they compare the gases and figure out that the garinafin gas is heavier. And that's why the other sack can carry more, which means that the garinafins have less lift, which means that makes sense because their wings are fucking humongous. And the, fact that it's flammable, probably it helps to keep them in the air and also fire breath. And she goes and checks on the manure of one of the, I'm realizing how much time I'm running out of. Holy crap. Well, long story short, they figure out that the way the garinafins digest their food is similar to the multiple stomachs of a cow, and that the fermentation in one of those stomachs is what creates this gas that they use. So that's, interesting because it changes them from these unknowable beasts into something like a giant flying cattle, which all of them are kind of oh, that's a little bit less impressive now that I know all about it. Which honestly, it isn't really less impressive, but I understand how that works, And they find out all these things about like the eggs, which it turns out they have they are mammals, but they lay eggs, and the eggs already have partly developed embryos in them by the time they're laid, which means if they are able to like capture a garinafin that's pregnant, they can potentially raise these eggs and raise garinafin themselves, which that would fucking even out the playing field. But I don't know how long it takes for them to grow. And ZOMI says something about how they haven't seen any juveniles, and that's interesting. You know, are they having trouble birthing young? Like, what's going on? And eventually they break into teams, and they have to go and do some, you know, more research. And THERA wants to go work on a ranch because as far as she is concerned, this like they are giant fire breathing cattle thing has really sunk into her brain. And that's how she sees them now, for better or worse. And so she is out here like definitely going to research cattle and try and apply that to what's going on with the garinafins. And she works really hard, and the ranch hands don't know who she is. So she keeps trying to sort of, when they like get really anxious and worried about what's going on in the world right now, she has to be the one to kind of like allay their fears and talk them down without revealing that. One could say she has like a vested interest in keeping them calm and happy. And yeah, the whole thing with the figuring out like the flames, ZOMI Kidosu is like the one that's completely on top of trying to figure this out. And it says she sent out word to the Farseers to gather and collect knowledge of novel ways of starting fire. And guess what? That shit turns out to be super, super timely. So we go to THERA Miro, who goes to speak to Tan Adu. I think I'm saying that right. And these are the people that we haven't seen since like the middle or beginning of book 1, who live on that island and wanted to remain unmolested by the rest of civilization, and who were like friends with the Krubins, the giant Krubins. And the reason that DeFiro is here is because he thinks that maybe they can get some of this Krubin help again. Then, you know, may as well give it a shot. And the whole like the whole vibe of this journey is almost like what could happen if Dara and the Liukins had met under different circumstances, because these people who are called the Aduans have been interfered with some by Dara. Dara has tried to take them over several times, but they have brokered a deal now with Kuni that they're not going to be bothered. So they are allowed to pretty much be left to their own devices and only, you know, go forth to Dara if they feel like it, because they want to find out what's going on there. So gradually, life begins changing where they have different materials. It says porcelain, lacquerware, and even silk could be found in the households of some of the Aduan chieftains. So this is just, I really like this as a sort of a sneak peek at the other way things could go if the Liuku weren't who they were, and if the people from Dara hadn't been who they were when they came to them. It's sort of a sad, you know, commentary in a way at just like the potential for peaceable trade and exchange of ideas and traditions that is often just like completely wasted because somebody wants to own somebody else, you know, and take them over. But this is DeFiro is like, he finds out about the whole thing with their gods as well, which is another thing that's happening to the gods of Dara, where they like took some of our statues, but they didn't understand that we like didn't pray to the statues, and that was not a thing for us. The statues meant a lot because they were made by our ancestors, but they weren't the gods. And then they began to like worship versions of our gods, or they carved statues here that were like reflections of parts of the Dara gods. Everything got mixed together. And this is just this is something that we have already seen. And I like that we're in the position of being able to like participate in conversations with the gods as readers and find out how they feel about the whole thing. And in the end, THERA figures out that like there's this really amazing fire starter technique that they have using a whale tooth and like a tube of some kind. And nobody can understand, because this is such an ordinary thing here, why THERA is so excited to see this thing. But he takes it, and I'm not sure, like, I don't even know if he realizes yet. Oh, yeah, he does. ZOMI Kidosu had asked everyone to seek out novel ways of making fire, and this definitely qualified. So they give it to him because it's like this really ordinary thing that he seems to love for some reason. And so he has made a big step, even though he doesn't know it yet. And I bet this is going to wind up being extremely important to them later on. All right, so I'm going to wrap up, but thank you very much, Kyle, for commissioning this. These were super, super fun couple of chapters. And thank you guys for listening. I hope you're enjoying it. And I will be seeing you again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.